This is a meeting of American radicals. Some would call themselves revolutionaries, but almost none are Marxists, and almost none are communists. They are members of the New Left. 9 days ago, at this convention of the National Conference for New Politics, they made their first attempt at political unity. Who they are, what brought them here, what they hope to achieve, and how important they may be, is the subject of the next hour. This is their view of America.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart, that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. I ask you to consider...
In the swelling voice of American youth, an insistent note of discontent can be heard. It sounds like this.
And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels. Then you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
The new radicals spring from an affluent America torn by racial conflict and by dissent born of the Vietnam War.
There are some strange things going on in America. It's not only in Mississippi. If the Constitution of the United States meant something to all the people of the United States, they wouldn't have to pass a law a day. But I got news for you, baby. It's from the top to the bottom.
If somehow you discuss this war in very mild terms and you're sort of disapproving and you're a little bit upset about it, then you're reasonable. But if you try to cut through that and get across the monstrous nightmare of that war and just what we're doing to that country and just what we're doing to the people there, and you try to put it in its proper poetic terms with its proper emotive values, then you're irresponsible.
The target of the New Left is not right-wing conservatism, but Democratic Party liberalism.
Since it is the liberals primarily who are keeping people oppressed in our society by their unwillingness to come to grips with the problems, then I feel that they have to be dislodged.
The question is, whose views shall prevail today? The majority of people in this country are my age and younger. The people who run this country are people whose ideas were formed during the 20s and 30s.
People are abused, used, preempted, forced, coerced, and in many cases handled fairly roughly by the system which holds out only the promise of a material affluence, only the promise of 2 cars, only the promise of a split level divided again and again and again in suburbia after suburbia after suburbia. That's the only thing that this culture can offer people now, bread alone. Now, the question is whether or not you're going to accept that.
This is Stalag 3, the notorious German prison camp.
This is a new camp. It has been built to hold you and your men.
Colonel von Luger, it is the sworn duty of all officers to try to escape.
There will be no escapes from this camp.
This is The Great Escape, the 2-night television premiere on the CBS Thursday and Friday night movies. The amazing story of World War II's greatest team of allied escape artists, men who plotted the greatest mass escape in the history of warfare. The Great Escape, starring Steve McQueen, James Garner, Richard Attenborough, James Coburn, David McCallum. A great motion picture, a great event. The television premiere of The Great Escape, September 14th and September 15th in color on the CBS Thursday and Friday night movies.
CBS reports The New Left. Here now is CBS News correspondent Bill Stout.
The New Left, its members call it the Movement for Social Change, is a noisy blend of people, mostly young, and ideals, mostly American. It has at best perhaps 300,000 members, a tiny minority, but including some of the brightest young leaders in the generation that now accounts for more than half this country's population. 2 points to keep in mind. The young radicals scorn communism, and they see liberals as their enemy. Not the right-wing Goldwaters and Reagans, but the New Deal Democrats like Hubert Humphrey and the Johnsonian Consensus. They say Vietnam is the liberals' war, because John Kennedy sent in the first large contingent of troops and Lyndon Johnson ordered escalation. It is also the liberals they blame for poverty and racism at home. And that accusation is the New Left, not so much a political program as a way of looking critically at America.
You could say that the upper and middle class kids who are making the New Left go are in fact bothered by a kind of poverty, a spiritual poverty, the spiritual poverty of middle class America. Who could have imagined 20 years ago or 50 years ago that all this affluence would turn out not at all to have been worth it? Who could have guessed that when you get things that you don't really work for, or when you're forced into a psychology of harem, scarum, acquisitiveness, where you just buy, who would have guessed that would have turned out not only to be unsatisfactory, but to be in fact destructive? And it seems that nobody really believes that it's a good life. Something went wrong here, you know?
It is a revolt that is all around us. It can be read in the more than 150 so-called underground newspapers, some of them produced in high schools. And it is in the lyrics of the young people's music.
I am trying everyone to believe, though it isn't really war, we're sending 90,000 more to help save Vietnam from the Vietnamese.
Take a look around you, boy. It's bound to scare you, boy. Yeah. Tell me over and over again, my friend, that you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
It is a revolt that reaches in many directions. From Europe, it borrows Albert Camus' conclusion that it takes courage to live in an absurd world. And from the Orient, it borrows Alan Watts' studies of Zen Buddhism, questioning that American ideal that says work and material success are the only measures of a meaningful life. That part of the revolt is mirrored in cartoonist Robert Osborne's satirical comments on the demands, the pressures, the anxieties, the hassles of the daily rat race. Thomas Pynchon's V, Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Joseph Heller's Catch-22 are other bitter portrayals of American life, all favorites of the New Left. And poet Allen Ginsberg, who now marches in peace demonstrations, voiced much of the discontent with middle-class values 10 years ago in his poem, Howl.
Moloch, Moloch, nightmare of Moloch. Moloch whose love is endless oil and stone. Moloch whose soul is electricity and banks.
Another of the New Left culture heroes, Mort Saul, keeps sniping at the same conditions the young radicals find destructive in America.
During a briefing at the State Department, the Secretary of State pointed out that there was a civil war in China, and that he claimed that he hoped we wouldn't have to intervene. If we do intervene, there's going to be a policy conflict, because we certainly wouldn't want to intervene on the side of a tyrant, Mao Zedong, but we certainly wouldn't want to be caught on the side of the people, which would set a precedent. So that's not the answer.
In the theater, empty of political satire for many years, the New Left came up with MacBird, a scathing comment on the pursuit of power.
My fellow Americans.
Again, the older generation denounced it as sick and tasteless, as a liberal attack on a conservative Southern president.
And I shall be the president of all. Not just the rich and not just the fortunate. Not just the folks who vote for me. But all. I have a dream. We have an opportunity to move not only towards the rich society, but upwards, towards the smooth society.
Playwright Barbara Garson's point is that MacBird is merely a corn-pone version of the power-hungry Ken O'Dunk brothers with their dreams of dynasty.
You, Bob, are still the second in succession. And Ted is next. And Prince is yet unborn. And for this land, this crowned continent, this earth of Mars, this seat of majesty, this forceful breed of men, this mighty world, I see a new frontier.
To the older folks, perhaps the most startling aspect of the movement is its rejection of the prosperous society which produced it, a favorite subject of cartoonist Jules Feiffer.
I'll tell you what really bothers you kids today. You just don't want to grow up.
I once wanted to grow up, but then I took a look at the grown-ups around me, complaining about the jobs they hate and dying of boredom months after they retire from them, picking wives out of the girls they're not attracted to, and remaining attracted to girls they think are tramps, watching TV 6 nights a week so they don't have to talk to the family, joining a club 1 night a week so they can talk to the boys, preaching to their kids about their inalienable rights, and then when the kids try to exercise a few, warning them to grow up. Mister, to my generation, not wanting to grow up is a sign of maturity.
This rejection of American values is the basis of the movement. A University of California sociologist who has studied the disenchanted young is Dr. J.L. Simmons.
I think that the movement fundamentally is a feeling in the air, a feeling that straight American society, as exemplified in the Reader's Digest and the establishment, just isn't making it in the modern world. The common denominator that runs through all of these groups, the hippies, the flower people, the racial integration people, the New Left organizations, is this feeling of opposition to conventional America, and that this is the real political force abroad in our land today.
To understand the New Left, it's necessary to understand their view of what's happened in the last decade. The key was the drive for civil rights, and it pulled together all the loose elements of young radicalism. And if any single event marked the beginning of the movement, it was in the summer of 1960, and it all began with an attempt to buy a cup of coffee. 4 college freshmen, all Negroes, were refused service at a Greensboro, North Carolina lunch counter, and the civil rights sit-in was born. Television pictures of students mauled by mobs and manhandled by police stirred campus feelings from one end of the country to the other. The silent generation had found a cause, or, as some put it, a moral equivalent of war. Its simplicity was appealing. No politics or ideology, just a willingness to back a belief by offering oneself. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC, was formed. A massive effort to register Negroes in Mississippi got underway, led by Robert Moses and a lesser-known volunteer, Stokely Carmichael.
By definition, if you're in Mississippi working for civil rights, it's dangerous.
The Mississippi Project more than doubled Negro voter registration from 25 to 68,000. But even with that, the Negroes had no voice, so the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was formed. Fannie Lou Hamer, a leader in the voter project, explains.
We didn't have no other choice except being a Freedom Democratic Party, because what had happened, we tried from the beginning, from the precinct level, to go into the regular party. And after we wasn't accepted, we decided to have something of our own, not just for black people in Mississippi, but for white as well.
Bob Moses, Mrs. Hamer, and Aaron Henry led the Freedom Party delegates before the Credentials Committee of the Democratic National Convention, summer 1964, Atlantic City. Their demand to replace the segregated all-white Mississippi delegation was a critical test of the values of American liberalism, and it was posed above all in moral terms.
We don't think that there can be any compromise with what we consider a wrong position or a wrong element. We don't think that the Mississippi Democratic Party espouses the philosophy of the National Democratic Party, and we think that we do. And we don't see why there should be any compromise between an issue that is involved in this much of being right or being wrong.
The settlement worked out by Hubert Humphrey with White House approval was a political compromise, offering 2 seats to the Freedom Party, the rest to the segregationist delegates. To party politicians, it was just one more compromise needed to hold together hostile groups making up the Democratic coalition. But to members of the movement, it was something else.
But I think what happened to us in Atlantic City made people really aware that the government is not really with the people, for the people, by the people, but for a handful of folk. And the people don't have anything to say. We were told there, if we kept up what we was doing, that the vice president wouldn't be nominated that night. And that's when I asked Mr. Humphrey, was his position one man more important than black people's lives in Mississippi that was suffering through what they had gone through? And then after that, I wasn't allowed to go to no other meetings with the big top leaders.
In the literature of the New Left, Atlantic City is described as conclusive evidence that for the young radicals, liberalism could no longer serve as a vehicle for social reform. The New Left's opinion of liberals was reinforced nearly 3 years later when Hubert Humphrey publicly embraced Lester Maddox, who, before becoming governor of Georgia, had waved a pistol and prescribed axe handles as the answer to demands for racial equality.
Tell your customers, go get some more axe handles.
To the young radicals, black and white, who had been in Mississippi, Atlantic City was the turning point. It proved to them that they could trust no one over 30, certainly not on moral issues, and especially not liberals. In the fall of 1964, students of the New Left went back to the campus, carrying with them some of the hard lessons of civil rights and political reality. They claimed the right to continue their political activity on campus, and the moral clash of the summer now became a battle against bureaucracy.
How many roads must a man walk down before they call him a man?
At the University of California in Berkeley, the square in front of the Student Union was traditionally open to speeches, discussion, and debate. Then, without notice, the university ordered a ban on all political recruiting and fundraising in the square.
The answer is blowing in the wind.
To students like Mario Savio, who had already been bruised in the civil rights battle, it was another move by the faceless bureaucrats to enforce their decisions without consulting those directly involved. But this time, the students fought back. Their free speech movement quickly evolved into a larger indictment of the university as a knowledge factory.
Mass production, no deviations from the norms are tolerated. Occasionally, a few students get together and they decide that they are human beings. Some students get together and they decide that they are not willing to be products. They decide they're not willing to be another thing produced by the university.
If you identified yourself, you would be disciplined by the dean's office. If you're not identifying yourself, we're arresting you because you must be an outsider.
What section?
The university said the state's authority to regulate political activity on state property could not be challenged. 3 months of conflict between the students and the administration finally brought an announcement of concessions by President Clark Kerr.
Prior university charges are to be allowed to lapse. The meeting is now adjourned.
But these concessions disguise the continuing hostility which students felt flashed forth moments later in the treatment given Mario Savio when he tried to comment on Kerr's announcement. 2 years after the first Berkeley explosion, the student demands still were being rejected, and in even tougher terms by newly elected Governor Ronald Reagan.
I don't think the administration should negotiate with the Students' Committee. I think they can listen to students, they can take into consideration their views and their opinions, but I think the administration gives away its authority when it sits down and agrees to negotiate.
Some students who tired of fighting the campus authorities simply dropped out. Others took the classroom into the open air, an academic happening in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Leonard Wolf is one of 40 San Francisco State College faculty members who are conducting classes in a free school.
One of the young people said that she wants education, but she doesn't want it in a box. Now, that box is very important. We do, I'm afraid, at the college frequently treat learning as if we own the product and we make the package and we either sell or give it to the young people in our own way. The young people in the park and in the Haight-Ashbury are saying to us, we don't know what education is, but we want it. Why are you so sure you know what it is?
The largest campus group in the New Left is SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. It has 30,000 members on 250 campuses. Using the methods of their Southern civil rights experience, SDS members set up slum projects in 10 cities. The one in Chicago was called Join, Jobs or Income Now, and its prime target was the slum landlord. The ghetto projects were designed to test the SDS belief, voiced by one of that group's former presidents, writer Carl Oglesby, the belief that the best hope of changing society is by helping the poor to help themselves.
The problem with the quality of American life is that it's too much organized, that nobody really is making important decisions for himself. The decisions are in the rule book. You inherit the decisions when you move into the system. When you go to get an education, you find out when you step into the ivy-colored gates that somebody already has decided what education means. Somebody has already defined what the educated man is. And nobody very much is interested in asking you what in particular you would like to know about yourself, your community, your history. And students just aren't involved.
By 1965, the major issues engaging the New Left were full civil rights for Negroes, a new relationship between student and university, and social justice through organization of the poor. How the young radicals are moving toward those goals in just a moment.
Perhaps the most astonishing breakthrough in recent years has been in the field of atomic medicine. Already doctors are using the deadly radiation of the atom, which by the 21st century may be one of the most valuable weapons in the battle for life. On atomic medicine, reporter Walter Cronkite probes a bold new medical frontier which is being developed to exploit the dread power of the atom. Today, the United States has some 4,000 atomic physicians whose practice of atomic medicine requires that they be part healer, part nuclear physicist. Through this new branch of science, doctors are able to see inside tissues and cells in their effort to answer the basic questions of medicine. What is the problem, and where is it located? For an examination of the unique powers of atomic medicine, powers which may be as familiar to us in the future as today's stethoscope, join Walter Cronkite on The 21st Century, Sunday at 6, 5 Central Time.
Just had to be you.
Barbra Streisand weaves her magic in a musical highlight marking a new season of CBS specials. It's a season for significant drama on the CBS Playhouse. An all-star cast in Reginald Rose's Dear Friends. And Melvin Douglas and Shirley Booth in the Loring Mandel drama Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. In the new season, look for quality entertainment from the two-man team of Flanders and Swan in At the Drop of Another Hat. Watch for outstanding biographical drama in From Chekhov with Love, with Sir John Gielgud starring as the Russian writer.
Sit down to write until you have something truthful
and enjoy a virtuoso performance by Roger Corgio in The Diary of a Madman. Watch for these and many more programs stamped with the quality that mark CBS Specials.
CBS reports The New Left continues. Here again is Bill Stout.
For young people who worked through the civil rights summer of 1964, the emotional consequences were as great as the political. The resistance of the system to orderly change deepened the radicalism of many, especially young Negroes. SNCC, once biracial, no longer welcomed white members. And in growing numbers, young Negroes turned to the black activism of Malcolm X.
We want one thing. We declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
Searching for black solutions, some of the younger Negro leaders probed the experience of other colored populations seeking liberation. Frantz Fanon, spokesman for the Algerian revolt, declared in The Wretched of the Earth that only through violence directed at their oppressors could black people regain self-respect. In Fanon, Stokely Carmichael, the new leader of SNCC, also found evidence the American Negro is in a colonial relationship to white America.
We have to move to a position where we can control the housing in our neighborhoods so that we're not exploited, so that we're not charged high rents to share apartments with rats, and so that the owners of those apartments don't live in the suburbs grabbing the profits from us, that we're able to grab it, and that the money will be able to stay in our community so we can develop it. It is no different from a colony in Africa who is supposedly free, but her resources are controlled by the mother country.
Carmichael was also convinced that appeals to justice and morality are ineffectual.
I think that this country is run by property ownership, and that black people are not only propertyless, they are viewed as property.
This, the radicals believed, was because the black man had lost his own identity by trying to become white. Therefore, he had to acquire pride in his own traditions.
Walker, why don't you know about Richard Wright? Why don't you know about J.A. Rogers? Why don't you know about Lerone Bennett? Why don't you know about Leroy Jones? Why don't you know about Tony Fuller? Why don't you know about Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois? And when you get the guts, you can ask your administration, why don't they teach you about Brother Malcolm X? Today we have to fight to define ourselves and our relationship as we see fit, and to have white society recognize those definitions. Very simple.
Carmichael's early definitions of black power seemed no different than the calls for Irish, Polish, or Italian power that resulted in ethnic bloc voting in the cities.
Black power is not just a mere slogan, nationally or internationally. It is real that black people can come together and start determining for their lives how they're going to live and controlling their economic and political lives.
But the scare headline potential of black power proved irresistible both to Carmichael and to reporters. They prodded him repeatedly to redefine black power closer to terms of the defensive violence he advocated to Negroes when they were attacked.
Then you're saying fight violence with violence.
I am saying that we must build a movement of black people that will protect ourselves so that we are willing to stop that by any means necessary. Now, I'm not concerned about the question of violence. It seems to me that that will depend upon how, in fact, white people respond.
Carmichael has been touring communist nations. The deepening Negro radicalism is seen also in the Black Panthers' armed march on the California Capitol, as well as in RAM, the pro-Chinese Revolutionary Action Movement. The increasing identification of the U.S. Negro with the plight of colonial colored peoples climaxed with SNCC support of the Arabs against Israel. The most violent extremism has been urged by the new head of SNCC, Rap Brown, who has been charged with inciting to riot.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brothers. Masses of our people are in the streets. They're fighting tit for tat, tooth for tooth, an eye for an eye and a life for a life. The rebellions that we see are merely dress rehearsals for the revolution that's to come. We better get ourselves some guns and prepare ourselves.
But many Negroes feel that Brown, Carmichael, and SNCC are only scapegoats to absorb official anger and frustration.
Stokely is not responsible, and Rap Brown is not responsible, because a lot of people is bitter don't have a television. They don't know what Stokely's saying. So a lot of people bitter that don't have a radio. And I know this to be true in a lot of cities. But I think what should be done, that America should wake up and try to do something about the cause.
Doing something about the cause is what Students for a Democratic Society had in mind when they set up the Community Union Project in Newark, New Jersey's Clinton Hill area in 1964. The goal? To help the poor to organize in behalf of their needs. The first aim was modest, a stoplight at a dangerous corner.
My son got killed last year, the 25th of December, and I want a traffic light.
At first, there were requests, and then protests.
The point is this. If the stop signs
signs will be put up pending the survey to be made with regard to the traffic and if traffic lights are needed.
That produced a stop sign and promises of a stoplight later. More demonstrations brought city officials with more explanations and still more promises.
I'll communicate with you. Now, you give me the names of the people right now, and I'll get back in touch with you to let you know what's going to happen. Now, we can't talk about what has happened in the past, but I'll get back in touch with you to let you know what the process, what the progress is on the light. Please have a little patience. Just have patience.
3 years later, there still is no stoplight at the intersection. Experiences like this underline some convictions of the Newark volunteers. Tom Hayden, one of them, was first president of SDS.
We have found that when push comes to shove, the society is very resistant to change, much more resistant probably than we thought 7 or 8 years ago. The average community leader in a city is a person with deep stakes in things being as they are. If he's in political office, it's doubtful that he wants many issues raised in his constituency, in his backyard. It's doubtful that he wants to see welfare mothers organized, tenants organized, block associations organized, because when people start to go on the move and they want things done for themselves, they put a pretty sharp eye on their leaders.
The Newark Democratic City Administration generally ignored the SDS organizers, except to brand them troublemakers. Far bigger trouble erupted the night of July 12th of this year. We talked to Hayden 3 weeks before the riots. His awareness of what could happen was coupled with a sense of inevitability.
If things are as bad as we think they are, if the schools in Newark, where I live, are in fact on the average 75 years old, if unemployment is 15%, if all these problems exist, then you have to ask yourself the question, why have the leaders not been able to do something about this? And are the leaders the people to organize if you want to make change? The war on poverty may have had decent democratic intentions at some point, but has turned out to be a very serious fraud. And it is not stopping racial violence at all, but encouraging it because it's one more promise that's not being kept by the federal government. So I would say it is an attempt to, an artificial attempt to restore law and order to a situation that is basically unjust, and until you deal with the injustice in the situation, you won't be able to have any peace.
While civil rights and social justice for the poor had been the main causes engaging the young radicals, the steadily escalating war in Vietnam soon became the overriding issue. Indeed, it joined all the scattered elements of the New Left, and it drew in from the outside many people, including some of the liberals, whom the radicals blamed for starting the war. No! No! Again, student dissent first brought the issue to the attention of the country. Young people from the Berkeley campus tried to stop troop trains and marched on the Oakland port of embarkation to protest the war. It was the start of a series of protests culminating in New York and San Francisco last April 15th.
Now the labor leaders screaming when they close the missile plant. United Fruit screams at the Cuban shore. Call it peace or call it treason, call it love or call it reason, but I ain't marching anymore. No, I ain't marching anymore.
The nation's largest peace demonstration was directed at the two principal issues of the New Left, repressive war abroad and racist poverty at home. The joining of the issues was symbolized by Martin Luther King.
The bombs in Vietnam exploded home. They destroyed the dream and possibility for a decent America. It is estimated that we spend $322,000 for each enemy we kill in Vietnam. while we spend in the so-called war on poverty in America only about $53 for each person classified as poor.
Another influential voice among the New Radicals, Yale history professor Stoughton Lind, visited North Vietnam with Tom Hayden, a trip that deepened his and the New Left's conviction that our foreign policy is contrary to the national interest and makes more enemies than friends.
There's something about this war which is different from World War II, different from other wars that Americans have fought. Something about this war that is, in fact, un-American. But I think we can change that trend of events if we change our policy. That is, if we stop supporting people like Marshal Key and stop sending Marines into a place like the Dominican Republic. If we try to come on as what we are, a revolutionary country, you know, a country that stood up for the right of a people to direct its own destinies.
In Cleveland this June, church, student, and academic delegates met to plan a summer anti-war campaign in neighborhoods across the country. The most radical plan of action was formulated at Ann Arbor, Michigan, where delegates to the 1967 convention of SDS voted to sharpen opposition to the war by fighting the draft at every opportunity.
We also urge aid to servicemen who wish to terminate their association with the Army by going underground.
In 1965, David Mitchell, a New Left hero, defied the draft and went to jail to uphold a principle established at Nuremberg where Germans were punished for obeying orders later declared criminal.
The Nuremberg trials established the principle that individuals must refuse to participate in such crimes, that it's up to them, no matter what their government orders them to do, to refuse. My position right now is linked immediately to what the United States is doing. I consider them to be involved in unjust wars.
Mitchell is in jail because his moral protest has no legal standing. This moral insistence, combined with righteous anger, is a trademark of the New Left. Dr. J.L. Simmons.
A lot of the things that the young people are saying and feeling and doing are standard brand America. They're the kind of things that people used to hear in graduation speeches and then just simply go out and forget. The young people of today are, I think, bent on rehumanizing our society. They see American society as a kind of cold marketplace where we become preoccupied with buying and selling goods and then buying and selling each other and then pretty soon buying and selling ourselves.
We'll look at some of the ways the New Left thinks our society can be humanized and at some of the political moves they have made to achieve their goals in just a moment.
Get in the winner's circle this fall with the NFL, the new look NFL, a 16-team, 4-divisional powerhouse, ready to blast off to a new season of super excitement. Once again, this fall, CBS Sports will be your eye on the NFL, presenting more games than ever before, all of them live and many in color. Afternoon games, night games, doubleheaders, and 5 postseason classics. Climaxed by the World Championship of Professional Football, the Super Bowl, exclusively on CBS. Yes, throughout the season, your ticket to NFL action is CBS Sports. For the early bird, there's a preseason bonus. Exhibition games during August and September. Then on Sunday, September 17th, the season officially begins with 8 big games. So for the tops in football excitement, be sure to get in the winner's circle when CBS television kicks off NFL 67. This is Eric Hoffer. All his life he has been a manual laborer. The last 25 years, a longshoreman on the San Francisco docks. He never went to school, yet his books and magazine articles are read here and abroad with a startled recognition that they are original, profound, and simple. Some call it genius.
The only new thing in history is America. It's blasphemous to say that, you know. But it's true. And, you know, when I talk about common people in America to some of the professors there, You know what I feel? I feel that I'm talking about mysterious people living on a mysterious continent. They don't know nothing about us. Nothing!
Next Tuesday night, he shares with Eric Seberide his witty and intuitive insights into the crucial issues of the day. Although far from a conservative, he often objects violently with those members of the New Left who find nothing good in America. In Seberide's words, Hoffer is the man who has rediscovered America. That's Eric Hoffer, The Passionate State of Mind, next Tuesday night.
CBS reports the New Left continues.
In the New Left's first attempts to translate discontent into direct political action, several young radicals ran for office in California. Robert Scheer, teacher and magazine editor, tried for Congress. His opponent, a liberal Democrat.
And the reason that I'm trying now to run against Cohalan is I feel he is more dangerous than the so-called right-wing congressman. That if we had a right-wing government, and if we had a reactionary government, then if the generals were in charge, because at least then you'd know where things are.
He lost, but Scheer took enough votes to hurt the Democrats, the goal of the New Left. A Los Angeles junior college professor, Farrell Breslowski, ran for the state legislature, also lost, also took Democratic votes. But Breslowski denies the effect of the New Left is to help elect conservatives.
Well, it wasn't really us who elected Reagan. It was the failures of the preceding liberal administrations that created the hysteria, the panic, the unhappiness, the fear on the part of the large numbers of voters who went out and sought an alternative to these problems. And since Reagan presented such an alternative, they voted for Reagan. The liberals are pleasantly very, healthy, very fat. They live in nice houses. They drink lots of scotch. And every so often they genuflect in the direction of principle by singing an old labor song. But they don't really mean it. You see, we want to create a meaningful alternative on the left so that if people are going to vote, let them choose between alternatives.
One alternative, the National Conference for New Politics, met in Chicago 2 weeks ago to chart a course for the 1968 elections. The joint chairmen were Simon Cassidy and Julian Bond. Cassidy was deposed from the leadership of the California Democratic Council as the result of White House displeasure over his vigorous opposition to the Vietnam War. Julian Bond was almost deposed from his seat in the Georgia legislature for the same anti-war stand. The New Politics meeting brought further evidence of the racial tensions within the New Left when the significantly outnumbered Negro delegates threatened to walk out unless they were given a greater voice. They stayed when the convention gave this Negro minority half the caucus votes and approved all their militant resolutions, one condemning the Israeli position in the Middle East war. Some delegates thought this was not so much black power as blackmail. As usual, New Left insistence on what they call participatory democracy dominated the meeting.
And if this convention can't give people the freedom to do what they believe in and trying to force them down some road they don't want to go down, it is not only not new politics, it's totalitarian politics.
Predictably, the delegates also attacked the old leader-oriented politics.
We've got to start at the grassroots level and do that hard door-to-door, sitting down with people, talking with people, really agonizing with people, taking some time out. Because this is how it's got to be done for the long haul. And if we aren't talking about that, then we are talking about the old politics. Politics of the leadership. Politics of you big leader, I little follower, me follow you. But we've got to work with the body politic. That's the part of politics that's dying, and I dare say dead in America today. We've got to revive it, and if we revive it, that will be new politics.
Because of this rejection of leader-oriented programs, the New Left Conference seemed chaotic by conventional standards, but at conference end, a program of action seemed to have emerged. Even though the delegates voted not to run a national ticket in the 1968 presidential election, they left the way open for local organizations in key states such as California to run third-party tickets in the hope of denying those states to Lyndon Johnson. When the convention closed, The political future of the New Left was uncertain. Its success at the polls will probably determine that. The discontent of the New Left has been noted by the politician most identified with young people.
However the war may seem to us, they see it as one in which the largest and most powerful nation on earth is killing children, and they do not care if accidentally in a remote and insignificant land. They see us spend billions on armaments while poverty and ignorance continue at home. They see us willing to fight a war for freedom in Vietnam, but unwilling to fight with 1/100th the money or force or effort to secure freedom in Mississippi or Alabama or the ghettos of the North. And they see, perhaps most disturbing of all, that they are remote from the decisions of policy.
But the general distrust felt by the New Left for all shades of liberalism includes the senator.
Kennedys and Hatfields are not the vehicle. Now, while we don't have, quote, the ideology yet, I think we have learned from experience that perhaps committees for new politics, perhaps third-party movements are what are necessary in this country. And that if it takes us 10 to 15 years to build a constituency, perhaps it's worth it. But if we, in a sense, transfer our allegiances to Kennedy, as many have suggested, where are we to go from there? Once Kennedy has co-opted us, in a sense, and told us about, quote, his new frontier, what's to prevent him from pulling off another Guatemala or another Cuba?
That kind of suspicion among the young has been fed by two exposés in the San Francisco magazine Ramparts. One about Michigan State University's role in building a secret police force for the Diem regime in Vietnam. The other revealing the CIA's penetration of student organizations. Ramparts editor-in-chief Warren Hinkle.
The central point about the CIA, which its defenders just will not discuss, is that the CIA is out of hand. It is, not only the worst example of Parkinson's law, but it's the most rambling, well-fed bureaucracy in America today. It has essentially no congressional controls on it, on how its money is spent, on what it does. Take that criticism for whatever you may, that you shouldn't expose these sort of things, but you notice that the president and the leaders of Congress jumped as soon as we exposed that thing and had a commission and reported 3 weeks later this was a bad thing to do and that they were going to stop it.
If the young radicals are suspicious of the liberal establishment, they are frankly bored by communism.
Communism as a force domestically in this country is virtually non-existent. The traditional Communist Party in this country, in my own view, and I'm speaking here primarily as an individual, has really adjusted itself, accommodated itself to the American way of life too deeply to be considered radical or revolutionary.
In the New Left, the heroes aren't people like Dimitrov, and nobody quotes Trotsky, and nobody makes a big thing about Lenin's pamphlets on infantile disorders. But instead, the New Left tends to draw its heroes and its analysis of the problems of our society from the American experience. The New Left might call upon, let's say, a Thoreau, or might call upon the IWW, the old Industrial Workers of the World of Wobblies.
If bureaucratic communism repels the New Left as a solution for domestic problems, it is equally impatient of anti-communism as a substitute for foreign policy.
It's basically our feeling that the Cold War should be over, that the splits that have taken place in the communist movement have made much of the rhetoric of the 50s and late 40s irrelevant, and that to continue with the demonology of anti-communism, the very simplistic demonology of anti-communism, and the concept of the international communist conspiracy marks our foreign policy as being out of date and in some ways a very dangerous thing.
It is foreign policy issues which have gained for the communists the few youthful recruits they have. Revolutionary movements like Vietnam's National Liberation Front and Castroism have followings. The Progressive Labor Party has substituted Maoism for Russian-style communism. The old Moscow-oriented party is mainly represented in the W.E.B. Du Bois clubs, which have about 1,000 members. But what separates the New Left from communism is the same thing that separates it from the old left: indifference to ideology and a dislike for hierarchy and formal organization. A sociologist who described the collapse of the old radicalism in The End of Ideology, Daniel Bell, thinks the new radicals simply are not practical.
I think what motivates the new radicals, and to this extent it's a positive side, is a very deep moral feeling. sense of dismay at some of the values of the society, dismay at the hierarchies of work, at the competitiveness of the society, some of the materialism of the society, and all the criticisms are put in moral terms. The difficulty is the inability to translate a moral conception into a political conception.
We traced the source of many of these difficulties to the lack of what we called participatory democracy, which meant that many of the people who were suffering or the victims of injustice in the country were really without political strength, really did not participate in the political process, and had not really stood up to fight against these injustices. The vital thing, I think, to get across to people is that they need to lead themselves and not leave things up to their representatives.
This seems to be the fundamental problem that involves the New Left, this mystique about the people and what they call participatory democracy. People probably feel ineffectual today because there's probably more participation in the society than less. Now, I can only argue this and perhaps try to give you some evidence of it this particular way. If you go into city after city, you'll find that there are now hundreds and hundreds more organizations on local levels, on city levels than ever before. But it also has the curious problem, you see, that it checkmates each other. 40 years ago in New York City, you can get more things done by the fact there's a political boss. So I'd perhaps argue a paradox here, that there's more participation, that quite often more participation leads to a sense of ineffectuality because there are more claimants in the arena.
Today's most effective professional radical who has organized ghettos from Chicago to Rochester is Saul Alinsky. He admires the young radicals, but, like Bell, thinks they're naive.
They don't know where they're going. All they know is they don't like the setup we got, which I can well understand. I've never liked it from the time I was old enough to look around, and I fought against it. But they don't understand the power concepts. They're allergic to it. In terms of communication with the establishment, you got to get away from this justice and morality. You have to communicate with them in terms of their own language, which is self-interest and power. And in order to be able to do that, you'll have to have the mechanisms, the media, to do it with, which means building a mass power organization.
We don't want to substitute just a new bunch of leaders. We don't think that a new bunch of leaders would be any better than the old bunch of leaders, because we think that that's not something that a social engineer can do for people. You can't give the welfare program to the poor people. The poor people have to take the welfare program over. The crucial question, the one which the movement is trying to put to the American people, is very simple. It's the question of whether or not they think the American people think they're fit to govern themselves. If the American people think they're fit to govern themselves, then they belong politically with the movement. Whether they want to call it right-wing, left-wing, conservative, liberal, or whatever is beside the point. If you think that the people shouldn't govern themselves, but rather that the decisions about their lives should be made by computers, then you don't have anything to do with the movement, and you belong in the Johnsonian liberal consensus.
The political editor of New York's Village Voice, once a New Left activist, now its biographer, thinks the New Radicals are a prophetic minority. Jack Newfield.
I think the strength of the New Left rests on the power of its ideas and by the fact that history is made by minorities, and the New Left is clearly a minority. For example, the abolitionists represented a minority, but their ideas finally prevailed. Or the Wobblies represented a minority, a very small minority, but finally there was a labor movement built in America. Or Bob Moses going alone to Mississippi in 1961 led in very indirect and diffuse ways to 2 civil rights acts. So the effect of the New Left rests on the power of its ideas. And among these ideas are, one, that the ADA, New Deal, anti-communist liberalism of the 30s is absolutely finished politically. That liberalism now stands with Les Mattox in Georgia and Marshall Key in Vietnam and the CIA on the campus. And this generation will not buy that style of liberalism. And there is now a transition. And I think the ideas of the New Left will come to make up the central body of radical thought in America in 20 years from now. The ideas of participatory democracy being the best antidote to bureaucracy and technology. The idea that paranoid anti-communism no longer has a place in American life. The idea that America can no longer go around the world crushing popular revolutions in Cuba, the Dominican Republic, or Vietnam.
Many Americans will be afraid of the New Left and its harsh criticism of almost everything this country lives by, from rigid anti-communism to the conviction that law and order and a good life for the majority ought to satisfy everyone. Older Americans may argue that the young always settle down with age. But these young radicals believe that as the first new generation to have a population majority, they will change the country before age changes them. Like them or not, these are the people and the ideas that have begun to shake America, intend to continue shaking it, and just might remake it. For CBS News, Bill Stout, good night.
Johnny's third birthday. There was a little family celebration. But Uncle George couldn't make it this year. Mac's a pretty good golfer. Once shot a 78. Seems long ago. Back home, Joe's friends went bowling and stopped for hamburgers. Joe wasn't there. Bill's crowd was at the beach soaking up sun. Not Bill. Paul's best friend is off on a wedding trip. Paul is taking a little trip too. 3.5 million young Americans missed all the joys of home this week, serving around the world for you. Like to do something for them? Support USO, the next best thing to home, with a friendly welcome in a foreign land, a choice of places to go in a crowded camp town, the joyous visit of a USO show. Supported entirely by your gifts through your United Fund or Community Chest. Someone you know needs USO. Give today.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How the labor leaders screaming when they close a missile plant. United Fruit screams at the Cuban shore. Call it peace or call it treason, call it love or call it reason, but I ain't marching anymore.
Was filmed and edited under the supervision and control of CBS News.